since his countrymen had proved themselves to be not yet mature enough for the non-violent resistance movement on a mass scale, Gandhi now dedicated himself to spreading the usage of the spinning wheel and the abolition of the concept of untouchability. Although the British Empire was Gandhi's principal opponent, he continuously strove to reform his own society and to abolish its injustices. Gandhi perceived untouchability as an inhuman sin and a flaw in the Indian society. In his commitment to the Harijans, he achieved their free access to Hindu temples and their participation in elections. Gandhi's struggle against violence, even in his own ranks, continued. In the Indian National Congress, in 1928, a group of young radicals, among them the later Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, demanded immediate independence from the British, if necessary with violence. They drafted a model of self-government and a constitution for an independent India. Gandhi achieved a compromise with his suggestion that the British be given a year's time to agree to the demands and to release India step by step into independence. The British, however, had their own time schedule and did not accept these demands. Consequently, in January 1930, the Indian National Congress passed a resolution on independence, which resulted in the Salt March, the most famous campaign of civil disobedience of the Indian independence movement. Gandhi had, at this point of time, reached the zenith of his popularity and knew that the masses were behind him, when, in March 1930, he took the pledge not to return to his ashram in Ahmedabad before the achievement of complete freedom for India. On the 12th of March 1930, Gandhi, together with 79 soldiers of his non-violent army, began the Salt Satyagraha. His urgent objective was to break the salt law, which was so important to the Indian people, and to demand complete independence from the British Empire. During the march, Gandhi spoke at the halts in the villages, but, above all, he spoke about the importance of the reform of Indian society. Child marriages should be abolished, as well as the consumption of alcohol. He highlighted the meaning of the spinning wheel, spoke about village hygiene, the necessity to abolish untouchability, as well as to increase tolerance among religions. He summarized his demands in a constructive program, the realization of which would have led to Sarvodaya, the well-being of everybody. Gandhi and his co-fighters covered around 15 kilometers daily. They reached Dandi on the 5th of April 1930 with worldwide publicity. The mood in the country had sharpened, particularly as the British gave no indication of dealing with Gandhi's demands. They allowed the situation to escalate. As Gandhi picked up a handful of salt after a morning bath in the Indian Ocean, and with that act broke the British salt monopoly, a fire was kindled countrywide. In all the coastal regions of India, salt was now peacefully but determinedly harvested, refined by the simplest methods, and sold. The women had a special role in this mass campaign of civil disobedience. During this decisive time, they left in large numbers the seclusion of their houses and threw themselves into the struggle. To that, Gandhi remarked, "In this non-violent warfare, women's contribution should be much greater than men's. To call women the weaker sex is a libel. It is man's injustice to woman. If non-violence is the law of our being, the future is with woman." The people fought on resolutely. The police carried out mass arrests. 60,000 political prisoners filled the prisons, and even then the people remained peaceful this time, and were ready to continue the campaign. After Gandhi was also arrested, 2,500 satyagrahis tried to peacefully occupy the salt works of Dharasana. All over the non-violent protesters were knocked down, although not resisting, seriously injured and even killed. The government retaliated with more repression and brutal violence. Every new repressive measure offered, however, yet another opportunity to disobey it. The boycott of foreign clothing, the pickets in front of the alcohol shops were strengthened. The farmers refused to pay taxes. The whole of India rebelled, and several provinces were put under martial law. India became a gigantic prison. The course of events gave the masses self-confidence and the power to persevere. When Gandhi was released from prison on the 26th of January 1931, the day of Indian independence, which he had proclaimed a year earlier, he said, "I am hankering after peace, if it can be had with honour." After tough negotiations with the Indian Viceroy Lord Irwin, the so-called Gandhi-Irwin Pact was signed in March 1931. It left the demand for independence untouched. However, permission for the production and sale of salt was granted. Further to that, all the prisoners of the salt satyagraha were freed, and the suspension of the activities of the civil disobedience movement was agreed upon to create the basis for further negotiations. Gandhi travelled to London in September 1931 with a team as the official representative of the Indian National Congress to attend the second Round Table Conference. The primary objective of the conference was the withdrawal of the ban on export of Indian fabrics to England, as well as the return of confiscated land to the farmers. Furthermore, a modus vivendi for the communal problem was to be found, as well as the position of the princely states in the future constitution. The Indian population naturally also hoped that the independence of India would also be negotiated. During the crossing on the SS Rajputana, Gandhi slept on the sun deck, spun his daily quantity of yarn, and lectured on non-violence. In London, he lived in Kingsley Hall, which was the Quakers' centre for social work in the slums of East London. Many people gathered in front of the house to welcome Gandhi.
I am thankful that I got this opportunity of being surrounded by these happy children and seeing the homes of the poor.
Although Gandhi represented the Indian position very clearly at the Round Table Conference, the hoped-for assurances were not forthcoming, and with that the conference ended, from the Indian point of view, without result. Gandhi's body was initially laid out in the rooms and later on the roof of Birla House. The next day, on the 31st of January, he was driven around Delhi for 5 hours past millions of people. On the banks of the Jamuna River, Gandhi's body was then burned according to Hindu rites on a funeral pyre of sandalwood. Still shocked by the assassination of Gandhi, the whole world took its leave of the prophet of non-violence. After 13 days of mourning, the urn with the remains of Gandhi was brought in a special train to Allahabad, to the confluence of Ganges, Jamuna and Saraswati. Gandhi's ashes were strewn by his sons over the holy waters, which make beggar and king, sinner and saint equal. Mahatma Gandhi was, in a world full of evil, an apostle of tolerance, of non-violence, and of belief. The strength of his intellect was the most powerful weapon of peace. The ethics of non-violence, of which he was a living example, live on without boundaries in time or in space.